Hi, I'm Sam Candy, founder and CEO of Responsible Futures. Welcome to Sustain Talks. Today, I'm joined by Gavin Lendon. Gavin is a sustainability consultant who focuses on strategy, purpose, carbon emissions, and net zero. He's an ESG specialist and GRI certified. If you're wondering what that is, we're going to get into it in a minute. Gavin was one of our panelists on Does ESG Matter the other day. There were so many questions that we didn't get through, and I thought I'd take this time to continue the conversation from where we left off and try and answer some of the questions that were asked. So, Gavin, welcome to Sustain Talks. Good to see you again so soon. I look forward to speaking to you again. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, it will be fun. We covered it in the webinar, but I think, we always get a lot of new listeners, viewers to the podcast. So in your view, let's just start with what is ESG?
ESG stands for Environmental, Social and Governance. It's being used since 2004 by the financial community to actually start assessing companies for non-financial aspects. It's developed its own language and its own kind of skill sets. A question that will come up later, I'm sure, is what is the connection between ESG and sustainability as a whole? But we'll do that in due course.
Yeah, well, actually, let's not wait around. Let's hit that one straight away, because there is a bit of confusion around ESG and sustainability. Why is that? Let's talk about the difference between the two.
But I'm only going to give you my perspective because everyone's view is unique to them, yeah. Obviously. For me, ESG focuses on the entity that's reporting. So as a consequence, it talks about basically what is happening to them. Whereas sustainability to me is not only what is happening to that organization, but what is also happening to the outside, the environment as a whole. It includes biodiversity loss. There's a lot more human rights aspects. There's a lot more kind of environmental impacts. One thing that I was going to mention, which we talked about briefly on the webinar, is ESG can be slightly misleading. So, for example, I was going to talk about MasterCard on the webinar. The MasterCard, in terms of the sustainability report, they are absolutely excellent. You cannot fault them. They have targeted, in terms of the UN SDGs, which I appreciate will come up as well. They targeted various SDGs to address. Now, ironically, I would personally have thought one of the SDGs that they would have targeted would have been responsible consumption, because I've literally in the last 2 weeks was approached about a post I made on LinkedIn about MasterCard adopting this. And it was about if they are sort of promoting the purchase of long-haul air flights, etc., and as a consequence, increasing carbon, for sake of argument, should that actually be greenwashing? And it's a good point. In terms of sustainability, our MasterCard, just as an example, targeting the wrong things in terms of ESG. So it's a controversial subject.
It is. And, when it comes to, I believe in also a sustainable economy, but it's just not at the mass that it has been. But there's certainly legislations around ESG and sustainability, and they are ramping up, and it is becoming more apparent, and there's a lot of call out nature now, which I think is really good. But in particular, let's talk a bit about those legislations and what they are and what they mean.
Right, in terms of, we'll start with the UK as a whole, and one bit of legislation that's come into effect recently is the TCFDs. And that at the moment is applying to the larger companies, and it makes a mandatory requirement to make certain climate disclosures. So you'll see what is happening a lot in terms of banks, financial institutions. When they're lending money, they're now asking the borrower what's their climate plans, what are they doing in terms of carbon reduction. I appreciate a lot of the discussion is focused on carbon emissions, which again, sustainability is much wider than that. But that's one aspect of it. And they'll have to make mandatory disclosures in terms of energy use, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a start. The challenging thing is researching for this session is it's likely that the TFCDs will be rolled out by 2025 to absolutely everybody, which is perhaps a little bit daunting for a number of people.
Yeah, so at the moment, isn't it, it's companies that have over 500 employees.
Yeah.
But for smaller companies, they're not going to have somebody within their company that's going to be able to. And just for those that don't know, TCFD stands for Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosures. Smaller companies are really going to struggle with this because they're not going to have the right people within their company. I guess it was the same around when we had to look at data protection, but the smaller companies are going to struggle, aren't they?
I totally agree with you. There's it's a real challenge, and I imagine what will happen. There'll be a transitional phase saying you need to adopt it, but if you haven't quite adopted it, we won't kibosh you over the head with a fine or a penalty for a period of 2 to 3 years, for sake of argument. I don't actually know, because I don't set policy for the government, strangely enough. But I agree with you. It is going to be challenging at the moment. Just to clarify slightly your point about the 500 employees, it is 500 employees, and also if you are listed. So if you are a listed company, which I think is mainly the stock exchange, but it might also apply to AIM as well. I need to check that because I do have some AIM clients as well.
And there's other things like CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what that is?
We are venturing now into Europe. Hooray! In simple terms, the CSRD equates to the UK legislation, but is European wide. Again, it is going to be the largest companies that it applies to first. It's mandatory disclosures on climate, etc., etc. You mentioned that I'm GRI certified. The GRI basically, they're broadly supportive of the initiative, but they think it should go further on human rights, due diligence, and some other aspects in terms of environment, etc. So the general thrust that I think me and you can draw from this is that it is going to become mandatory for, at the moment, large companies, but in due course it will be all companies to make these disclosures of non-financial information, which, as you say, is challenging and rather daunting. I don't want to completely scare the audience, because when you start looking into it, it becomes easier. But like most things, it's taking the first step that is the challenge.
And of that reporting, like just looking at the reports a little bit closer, what kind of things, is it you've got to report on your carbon footprint, or your number of employees, your diversity and inclusion? What's it actually in the report?
Well, that's an interesting question, because at the moment you have set structures for financial reports. In terms of the non-financial disclosures, it's much looser, for want of a better expression. GRI, which is the one that I'm certified in, produces a form of structure, which basically is a simple kind of approach of, here's a context index which is stuck towards the back, that if you go to that first, it will tell you where every bit is. But At the moment, there is no requirement to have a specific structure. So if I look at Diageo's report, it'll be totally different to, say, Nike or BP. So that can in itself can be confusing. And there's also the slight issue, which I know this is a subject you would really love, is there's no actual auditing of the sustainability reports. So people can make statements. Now, you mentioned the fact that people are getting called out on these. So if they make a statement that has to be factually correct, but that's the limit of the requirement. So you can make sort of marketing-ish statements, but I think that will get tighter over time.
Well, it needs to, really, because anyone, and actually, I've been having this conversation loads recently, that people are making statements about getting to net zero, and then you ask them, oh, brilliant, tell us about your plan, and they're like, oh, we haven't wrote the plan yet, but you've just claimed that you're going to get to net zero by 2030. Oh yeah, we'll work it out. It's those reports. I guess it starts with get everyone into the habit of doing it, and then we'll make a policy around it.
I totally agree with you. I mean, even if you take COP26, everyone's going to achieve net zero by 2050. Everyone pats each other on the back and says, good job, well done, absolutely great. But there's no plans in place to achieve that in certain countries. Admittedly, the UK's got some plans, but there's still an element of detail missing. But when it comes down to companies, you make a broad brush statement of saying, oh, we're going to hit net zero by 2035 for sake of argument. And are they going to do it? Now, the interesting organization to watch is the NHS, because I've listened to the chief sustainability officer there, and oh my God, he is so serious about them achieving it. They've set it in place already that they're going to hit their largest suppliers by 2027. And then by 2030, they're going to achieve net zero scopes 1, 2, and 3 globally. So that means all their suppliers on their global emissions will be net zero. That is a really ambitious target, but they seem to be determined to achieve it.
Yeah, it is. And, we've spoke about this before. Companies need to do it without offsetting, right?
Yes. Now, as we both know, this is a subject we are both aligned on. My personal view is there is a place for offsetting. However, it shouldn't be used as an excuse not to try. So I am pretty disappointed that let's say you get down to 10% of emissions and you say, oh, right, well, we'll just offset the rest. Oh, look, we've achieved net zero. No, you haven't really, because all you've done is just bought something that supposedly gets you to net zero. You should really try and get as close as you can to zero yourself. Some organizations such as Brewdog are trying to be net negative. So they're trying to go even further. So that is impressive, but I know me and you are completely aligned on carbon offsets.
Yeah, I'm not against planting trees, and I think that we should. I'm definitely against destroying the rainforests, and I think it's devastating what is happening to the rainforest at the moment and to other forests around the world. Not even from natural forest fires, but climate change is getting worse. But the length of time that it takes to grow a tree to capture the carbon,
which is why I think it's important that people must realize that offsetting isn't necessarily planting trees.
Yeah.
You can get now offsets from regenerative agriculture. We've got quite a strong regenerative agriculture in this country. There is a range of farmers called Gentle Farming.
Yes, I interviewed him actually. Great guy.
Thomas Gent, yeah, top man. And they are looking at acquiring some sort of carbon credits via, I think it's a company called Agreener. And it pleases me to support something that is actually in the UK as well.
Yeah.
And it's certified and it's approved. As well as that, you've got seagrass, mangrove forests. So there's plenty of options. I think, and I'm sure, Sam, you know this better than me, if we plant all the trees we claim to offset, we've covered the planet twice with trees. So something somewhere isn't quite adding up.
Yeah, I don't think it's adding up. I don't think the the amount of trees that are cut down and the amount of trees that are planted, I think it's like 7 million a day are cut down and 7 million a day are planted. And well, what's the point of that? We have to stop the ones that are being cut down, is my point. But you're right. If you planted all the trees that we're saying that we're planting, then we'd all live in forests, and that's not happening. So I think that there's some statements, but it as you say, it's more than just cutting down trees.
To dwell on your point slightly, on your point about deforestation of the rainforest, in particular Brazil, you're cutting down mature trees. You're planting saplings.
Yeah, I know. Those trees have been growing for hundreds of years. They say that it takes 30 years for a tree to be able to sequester the carbon. Yeah. And 30 years is going to be too late. So what's that sort of brings back, what is the point? So I think we have to look into other solutions as well. I just want to go back to some of the other reporting frameworks that are available, and not necessarily reporting frameworks, but there's things that people use, like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Do they fit into the ESG framework?
Now, I'm slightly biased coming from GRI, so I'll talk about the other frameworks. The SDGs have been designed, obviously there's 17 SDGs. Underlying the 17 SDGs, there's 169 targets, which I will add a link to send to you, which you can add to underneath the podcast, so actually people can see what these are. And they drill down into a level of detail. Once you've got to that level of detail, you're beginning to hit matters that really should be in ESG in the first place. So some of the frameworks don't actually look at SDGs specifically, but will pick up the issues that are covered by the targets. So that's in their defense. GRI, however, has been developed in conjunction with the UN Global Compact. So it naturally includes the SDGs within it. So hence the reason I'm slightly biased. So
and that's fair enough. It's yes. The framework that you work within, and so you should be promoting that. But what about other metrics and other KPIs that can be used?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. As you know, if you're trying to develop a strategy, you're trying to achieve a goal. If you're trying to achieve a goal, the goal has to be measured in some shape or form. I think it's Porter, the management guru, basically said, if you can't measure it, you can't control it. So stating all that, the KPI has to be related to the target you're trying to achieve. So if we just jump around the subject slightly, and you talked about carbon reduction, there's science-based targets which people should subscribe to in time, which basically says, I'm going to achieve net zero by 2035. Great statement. But if you say that and then say, but I've got the science-based targets to prove that I'm going to achieve it, what the science-based targets will do is look where you're trying to get to in 2035 and say you need to achieve this by then, this by then, and this by then. So that in itself is great. In terms of KPIs across the field, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve as a target. I'm slightly biased in terms of sustainability. So if we take a social target, for sake of arguing, and you've got number of employees, you want to try and understand how much your employees are doing for charitable causes or whatever. So that in terms gives you a metric, how number of hours you've let your employees go and take time off work to deliver a charitable objective. Great. So there's plenty of metrics you can use.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, for a lot of companies still, even though there's so much talk about this, I put out content every single week, every single day, you do, there's so many people, but obviously the algorithms of social media mean that people that are engaged see it and people that aren't don't. So there's a lot of people that are still not sure where they can start. So taking out all of the directives and the frameworks and everything else, if you're saying to somebody, right, this is where you should start, this is the basics, where do you go in with an SME?
So I think personally, and we did touch on this in the webinar, and I think we were all aligned. The first thing you need to do is think about what you're trying to achieve. Just take some time, take a day out from the office and think, what am I trying to achieve? And then once you've got in mind the kind of objective of where you're trying to go, you need to establish where you are, which comes back to carbon footprinting. What are you doing already in terms of sustainability? And then once you know where you were or where you are and where you want to get to, you can then start planning how to get. You don't necessarily need frameworks to achieve this. You could. You don't necessarily need to become a B Corp. You don't necessarily need to do GRI or whatever. If you've got an idea of where you are or where you want to get to, you can easily plot the route. I say it's easy, it's not necessarily easy.
No, it's not. And you know, you have to look at your carbon footprint, you have to look at your workforce and what's important to them as well. And, you know, like we often talk about environment, we don't always talk about the S in the ESG, and that's sort of diversity and inclusion, health and well-being, community and charity. And I think that is as important as the E. And in environment, we always talk about your carbon footprint, but we don't necessarily really go into detail about waste and recycling and the circular economy, which I think the more companies that look at the circular economy are going to help us to get into a better position.
Without a doubt. If you think in simple terms, that even if you play a video game, you get told at the start of the game you have 1,000 units of this resource, 1,000 units of that resource, 1,000 units of that resource. That's the planet. It has a finite amount of resources. So until we get to a point where we actually recycle those resources through a circular economy, then QED, we're heading to a little bit of a disaster. Now, admittedly, some of that might be further away, but in terms of achieving it, making your business more circular simply by just keeping your packaging, or getting your bottles returned, or recycling the plastic, or taking an old phone back when you replace the new phone. Simple gestures. It's fascinating. Nespresso, for example, in Switzerland, have a circular project whereby the challenge is you use your pod. You can tell I don't drink coffee. You can use your pod.
It's a pod.
And then, this is a pod. And then you put it into your post box in terms of in a special package, and the Swiss Postal Service pick it up. It's just brilliant. So there are ways.
Won't that ruin the letters that are in there that are being posted, because you get coffee all over all of the letters?
Well, in theory, the pods are empty by then, I hope. But that's one of the challenges.
Yeah.
One of the challenges in terms of the circular economy is getting it to scale.
Yeah.
Just for another example, in the UK, TerraCycle and Lay's, which is the company that owns Walkers, recycle crisp packets. So, but the challenge there, and I only have to listen to my wife on this one, is you have to practically iron the crisp packet, fold it up, put it into the collection point, and then it went away. And most people are just scrunching their crisp packets. So there are challenges within this.
Yeah, I had a brilliant conversation. Actually, the podcast I put out this week was about e-waste and recycling our computers and technology. Yeah. And it's shocking. 53.6 million tons, or was it billion tons of e-waste? And, you know, I remember in my old companies, you'd open the IT cupboard and they'd have all their old computers piled up in a, you know, that's not, that's like screwing up a crisp packet. You need to like look after your things to recycle them as well.
There's a great company whose name escapes me, so yet again I'll send the link to you in due course, that simply just recycles computers.
Stone Group was the one that I was speaking to the other day. They're fantastic what they do. Yeah.
And it's not, if you bear in mind, most 5 years ago, where Sam and Gav were slightly younger, that back then, if you said someone, oh, you can have a recycled computer, you would turn your nose up and go, oh, not very good. But what they can do nowadays with them, they are just as good in terms of performance as some of the newer computers. So there's no loss in performance there.
How important is all this? And I always ask this because, you know, some people say, oh, I don't like to scare, but I think that we are heading for an absolute climate disaster that seems to be getting worse and worse and worse each year. What are your thoughts?
You chose, we're recording this on the Friday. Now, on the Monday, the BBC and Reuters reported that we are 2 years away from hitting 1.5 already, when we should be hitting it at 2050. So, slight clue there. The urgency is now. Like you, I don't like scaring people per se.
Oh no, I like scaring them. I'm like, scare them. They're not really paying attention. It's like people are oblivious to it.
Well, that's something I'll come on to in a second. The reports on Monday were pretty shocking and horrendous. And so there is a need, there is an urgency, that's without question. The point I was going to make is those two stories only ranked halfway down the page because Depp versus Heard was far more interesting. It's a court case. This is the planet disappearing.
Yeah.
And it comes back to, I'm sure you've seen that Netflix film, Don't Look Up.
Yeah.
We're actually living
I've wrote about it so many times. Yeah. I know.
It's shocking.
Yeah. I know, it really is. And that news this week, I think it, you know, it seems to be getting closer, but I don't think people really can, maybe they're not relating enough to, you know, the food shortage is going to get more and food's going to get more expensive. And, you know, we're going to have to look at locally grown food more, where the energy prices are going through the roof. People are struggling at the moment. And that, because of climate change, it's just going to get worse and worse.
Precisely. And I think you're talking about it in a UK context. Now, on the webinar, I touched on the fact that in India and Pakistan, the temperature is horrendous, and that will continue. And at that point, I mentioned the fact that there's going to be mass migrations.
Yeah.
Which is a bit controversial, seeing as we're living in Brexit land and we're defending our island and sending people to Rwanda. That's a political point, and I don't want to go down that road. But in due course, there will be mass migrations of people away from the inhospitable places to the more hospitable places. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your view, we live on a very, very temperate island. So there is problems ahead.
Yeah, there is.
Without being doom and gloom.
Oh, me and you, Gavin, we could just talk about this all day, every day. I only spoke to you the other day and we're back again. But I think it's so important to have these conversations. I will have them week in, week out with as many people as I can. And honestly, thanks for sharing your insight. I think it's really important that we covered those other questions that we didn't manage to cover in the webinar. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of changes coming out. And we just wanted to sort of mention here, we've got another webinar, why net zero matters. So we're going to delve a little bit deeper into what net zero is and how you get there, and talk further about offsetting. That takes place on the 9th of June. Please go to www.responsiblefutures.info and check out our events page for free tickets. All of our content is free. And yeah, it just leaves me to say thank you, Gavin. This has been such a good chat. I look forward, we're definitely going to have more of these conversations. Been great working with you, and look forward to speaking to you further. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, take care. Bye.